Ever felt stuck because you have no investor contacts and no clue where to start? That's where I was until I implemented the AIR method, which has now helped founders raise over $250 million. So in this video, I'm going to show you the safest, easiest way to build your investor network from zero, even if you think you have nothing to offer. And what I'm about to show you kind of goes against some of the most common fundraising advice that founders get taught, which is basically to do something that looks like this. So when founders think they don't have a network, they're told to just start cold emailing investors, either through their website or through LinkedIn or just general cold emails. So you're sending 100 emails, you're just going on LinkedIn, hoping for the best, hoping for 2 to 3 responses and praying that someone takes a meeting with you. This is what most accelerators and advisors recommend when you say, I don't know any investors. Or, God forbid, the worst one, which is you try and outsource it and pay for them, which never works. But here's the thing. I've worked with hundreds of founders, and after looking at the data, what I found is that cold emails to investors have about a 1 to 2 response rate if you're lucky. So if you send 100 cold emails, if we use the upper range, you might get 2 responses. And of those 2 responses, again, if you're lucky, maybe 1 will actually take a meeting. So these are the kind of numbers that you're looking at, and there's not that many investors in the world, especially ones that actually make sense to you. But the thing is, it gets even worse, because that 1 meeting from cold outreach, well, the conversion rate of actually getting the meeting, but then also actually getting investment in the end, is much less than if it was warm, because you're going into those meetings with zero trust. They don't know who you are. They've never met you. So you're looking at spending potentially 2,000 cold emails to get 1 investor to end up saying yes to you and give you a term sheet. And there's probably not 2,000 investors that make sense for you and what you're doing. But here's what's really broken about this approach. Most founders actually do have a network. You just don't know how to use it properly, and you haven't built a system in place of how to look at it and how to understand if you've got it. So you don't put everything in place and you just think you don't have a network. So look, just as an FYI, if you want to check out how to build a network properly, then check out the links below and it will give you a bit more detail of how you can do that and implement this AIR framework in a much simpler way. Now, I should mention, I've seen this pattern hundreds of times. Founders come to me saying, I have no network. And within weeks, using what I'm about to show you, they're getting warm introductions to the exact investors that they want and need. And they have a functioning network and they understand and actually are structured in who they need to reach out to and how they do it. Because here's what I've discovered. According to studies, warm introductions are more effective than cold emails. But most founders never tap into their existing network because they don't know how to map it properly. And they don't know the systems in place of what they need to do. So I thought, wait a second. So what if instead of teaching founders to cold email better, I showed them how to unlock the network they already have? What would actually happen if I was able to do that? And that's how founders like Keith went from having no network to raising £1.7 million. Chris went from having nothing to raising $4.3 million using the same approach. Daniel, €4.5 million. Eldon, $3.15 million. Vishal raised £4 million. Mehek raised $300,000 USD. Felipe raised $6.8 million. And these were all founders where every single one of them thought they had no network when we started. They were all preparing to send hundreds of cold emails, already did, and got nothing from it. But instead, they used the AIR method and was able to build a functioning network that got them the 50 meetings that they needed to successfully raise for their startups. So now I'm going to show you the exact 3-step system I use to help founders build investor networks from scratch. I'm also going to address whether this means you should never cold email again. So step 1 of the system works like this. If you want to build a house, what's the first thing that you do? It's not start hammering nails, right? That just wouldn't work if you want to build a house that actually stays up. Because first you need to create a blueprint. You need to do the prep work. Because if you don't know what you're building, you can't organize your materials properly and you don't understand the step-by-step process to go from foundations to a functioning working house. So for me, and every single successful investor network that I've worked with, it starts by getting super organized about your network building system and what I call assemble. And this means understanding exactly how many investors you need, which specific investors you're targeting, and setting up the systems so you're doing everything in the right way. Most founders skip this step and aren't structured in how they assemble their network. They think, I need to raise money, and immediately start reaching out to random people. But without proper assembly, you're just throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping something sticks. And that's not the way in which we need to do it. You need to make sure we're preparing in the right way. So what you need to do is you need to set clear targets. How much are you raising? How many investors and what investors make sense? Who can potentially connect us? And having a system in place of how we implement and map this in the right way. Because this becomes your blueprint for everything that follows, and then gives you a way to build a functioning CRM and investor network that actually allows you to get the warm introductions that you need to successfully fundraise. But even if we get super organized in our network, we still need to find and map out who can actually create those warm connections. And that brings us on to step 2, which is where the magic really happens in this framework, and really where you need to hone and spend the most time on. Because think about it like this. When I was speaking to Vanessa, she was trying to find and meet investors, but had been having trouble with reaching investors. So she was spamming cold emails and LinkedIn DMs and not getting anywhere. So when we did this exercise, and we actually sat down and asked, do you know who can help you? And do you have a list for this? She didn't. And she had a great network from a background, but she thought she didn't have a great network because she didn't do the work to really understand who can help her. And that's the biggest mistake founders make when getting warm introductions systematically. You aren't actually doing the work to uncover who can help you, and just getting out there and building a system to find those warm introductions and start to map out your introductions and really give as much value and help everyone so that when you do ask them for introductions, they actually give it to you. And that's why the intro section of the AIR framework is so important, is a key part of what we're doing. And by building those intros in the right way, you can actually implement everything and build the network that you need. So there are 3 parts to the intro section that most founders completely miss. First, you need to build a connector list, because these are the people in your existing network who might know investors, they might not, but just people who you think who can actually help you. And here's what's surprising. You probably have way more connectors than you think. You haven't looked at your emails, your LinkedIn, or anything like that. These can be former colleagues, university friends, other friends, advisors, customers, suppliers, more personal, family. Everyone knows someone, and you haven't done the work to really understand what that looks like. The second thing you need to do is you need to map your network properly. This means literally drawing out who in your network might connect you to which investors. Most founders have never done this exercise, which is why they think they have no network, and they don't understand who can actually connect them to who. And because of that, you don't really understand how many warm introductions are so close to you. And the third is you need to have a structured process for actually asking for introductions. Most founders just say, do you know any investors? But there's a specific way to ask that gets much better results. So once we've assembled the CRM in the right way, we've built out the intros to get to where we need to, we then need to ask in a much better way that actually allows you to get the warm introductions you need. So once we have this sorted, we should have a functioning CRM with a list of 150 plus investors, at least 100 plus warm intros into those people. But the thing is, that's easier said than done. And that's why step 3 of the AIR framework is so important in making sure we execute on this day to day and that you run everything. And that's really what step 3 is about. It's about execution. It's how you actually run your network building phase and conduct your outreach in a coordinated way that really allows you to get the introductions and get the investor meetings that you need for your funding round. This means having a system where your network is working in unison. You're not randomly reaching out to people, but you have a structured approach where you're accountable every week and you're tracking your progress and you're making sure nothing falls through the cracks. That's really fundamentally what we're trying to do here. Because most founders, they treat networking like a hobby. They reach out to someone when they remember to, they do everything day by day if they really want to. But successful fundraising requires treating your network building like a full-time job with proper systems and accountability. We're working every week on improving it. And that's what's going to give you the highest chance of success at getting the network that you need. Now, why does this work so much better than cold email? Well, remember, warm introductions are more effective than cold emails. But it's not just about effectiveness. Realistically, it's about scale. When you properly map out your network, when you do the work that you need to, you realize that just one person can introduce you to potentially 20 to 30 investors if you approach it right, not to mention the other connectors that they introduce you to. So that's equivalent of sending 2,000 cold emails, but with a much higher response rate of 25% compared to 1%. And that only exponentially increases your chance of fundraising and the time that you spend on it in a much more structured and really driven way. And here's what most founders get wrong. They think networking means going to events or collecting business cards. But real network building is about systematically mapping and activating the connections you already have, and then sitting down and just talking to people and giving value. And the biggest benefit of this is it's not going to help you with the fundraise, it's going to help you with everything, whether it's hiring, sales, product, because you're going to be building a network of people around you who love what you're doing. So don't make the mistake of jumping straight to cold outreach when you haven't properly explored your warm network first, because this kind of work is going to be the reason you actually get funding, that you're not going to be wasting months and months of just not getting anything. And you're actually going to be able to get to a point of where you can get to the 40 or 50 meetings you need. And the truth is, if you're organized about it, you probably have the access to the investors you need. You just don't know it yet. And the AIM method isn't just about building a network from scratch. It's about uncovering and systematically activating the network you already have and making sure we're doing it. And every founder that I mentioned, whether it was Keith, Chris, Daniel, Eldon, Hatim, Mehek, Vanessa, Felipe, they all thought they had no network. But within weeks of applying AIR, they were getting warm introductions to exactly the investors they needed in a much more structured way, in a much better way, that converted in a much higher amount because there was inherent trust there from an intro. So here's what you do. Start with Assemble, get organized about exactly who you need to meet, then move to intros, so you map out your investor network and identify your connectors, and then finally run. Execute systematically with proper tracking and accountability. And if you want to implement how you do this yourself, check the links below to learn more about how I can help you do this and implement this yourself. So today you learn why the AIR method is more effective than cold emailing investors. You learn the 3-step system that's helped founders raise over $250 million by unlocking their own networks they didn't know they had. But once you actually get into a meeting with investors, how do you convince them that they want to invest into you? Like, what does that look like? Well, if you want to go deeper, check out my next video where you learn how to craft a narrative that makes investors love you and want to invest into you.